Yeah, I think we've all been there. Right?
Bro, I
You're
could.
sitting at your desk, or maybe you're, I don't know, elbow deep in logistics, or just sweeping up at the end of a long day, and this thought just hits you.
Like a ton of bricks.
Yeah, and it's this crushing weight of, is this it? You
Mhm.
feel that grind, that monotony, and you get this persistent sort of low-grade feeling that the real meaningful work must be happening somewhere else.
Exactly. We have this idea, and I think it's culturally reinforced, that there's a tension between the sacred and the secular.
Yes.
We can't help but categorize our lives. This task over here is spiritual because it's, I don't know, ministry or mission, and this other task is just,
Should work.
it's just commerce or maintenance or administration. We build this whole hierarchy of what matters.
We absolutely do. And today we are going to do a deep dive into this amazing stack of sources. We've got historical accounts, really powerful biographies, some deep theological reflections, and they're all designed to just dismantle that feeling.
Yeah, to take it apart piece by piece.
This is really for anyone who operates from a place of deep conviction and wants to understand what work is supposed to be in that context.
And the core question is, I think, a challenging one, maybe even a little uncomfortable.
Go on.
Can sweeping the floor or debugging a line of code or, answering a really frustrating client email or even standing in a courtroom, can that be as spiritually significant as running a mission
Or preaching a sermon.
or preaching a sermon? Yeah.
And what's amazing is our sources, they don't just lean towards yes,
Mhm.
they absolutely insist on it.
But there's a catch.
There's always a catch.
It requires this fundamental reorientation, a change in your heart posture and the why you do the work. It's not about changing the job title on your business card.
That's the mission today, then, to synthesize these powerful stories and principles to show that the holiest thing about your job isn't what you do.
It's why you do it, and maybe more importantly, for whom you do it.
Exactly. So we're going to explore 6 complementary dimensions of this idea of calling. We'll look at sanctifying the mundane, the power of staying in your post, moving toward pain.
And also, how to think of work as cultivating culture, how to chase faithfulness over what the world calls success, and maybe my favorite, building for the least.
Okay, let's unpack this. And we're going to start in what has to be the loudest, hottest, most unpleasant place you can imagine.
The 17th century equivalent of a boiler room.
We're talking about a monastery kitchen. So let's go back in time. We're in Paris around the 1660s at the Discalced Carmelite Monastery.
Now, this is a place you'd imagine as, being defined by quiet devotion.
Right. Beautiful Latin chants, deep contemplation.
If you're one of the choir brothers, that is.
Exactly. But that's not who we're meeting. We're meeting a man named Nicholas Herman, who we now know as Brother Lawrence.
And Nicholas was, well, he was a humble, uneducated man. He'd been a soldier, and he'd suffered an injury that left him with a permanent limp.
So when he gets to the monastery, they basically look at him and decide he's only fit for the lowest, most physically demanding role.
He couldn't join the choir. He wasn't part of the scholarly discussions. His assignment, day in and day out, for years, was the kitchen.
And we have to really visualize this kitchen. This isn't a modern stainless steel setup.
Not at all. It's cramped. It's either freezing cold or suffocatingly hot from these messy wood fires.
It's smoky, it's noisy, with pots clattering everywhere, and it's just a constant rush.
And the sources say Brother Lawrence himself was, well, he was kind of clumsy. He was always dropping things, and the work made his bad leg ache constantly. It was, by all accounts, just a miserable assignment.
Yeah, and this becomes a huge source of spiritual conflict for him.
It really does, because years before, he'd had this profound mystical experience.
What was that?
He was just looking at a barren tree in the middle of winter and had this sudden, overwhelming realization of God's quiet, persistent faithfulness.
Yeah.
That life was still working under the surface.
So he comes to the monastery wanting to recapture that deep sense of peace.
But the kitchen feels like the absolute enemy of contemplation. He feels like his spiritual life is just draining away while he's scraping grease and mopping floors.
He actually wrote that the kitchen felt like a world of trouble.
Yes, a barrier separating him from the real presence of God, which he just assumed lived in the quiet chapel where everyone else was praying.
And I think this is a moment we all face, right? Where the reality of our actual job feels like it's in direct opposition to the idealism of our calling.
Absolutely. But then we get this hinge moment, the thing that pivots his entire perspective, and it happens right in the middle of a frantic, smoky breakfast rush.
The famous frying kick.
The frying cake. The sources say he's struggling to turn these cakes in a pan. They're smoking, the heat is intense, and he finally manages to flip one without dropping it.
And in that tiny, mundane moment,
The realization just lands. It's more profound than any theological lecture. He realizes, and this is the quote, "We can do little things for God. I turn the cake that is frying on the pan for love of him."
wow.
That tiny, almost silly action becomes his entire spiritual framework. It just shatters the spell of that sacred-secular divide.
Let's stay on that for a second, the sacred-secular divide, because that is the whole principle here.
It is. Our default assumption is that God is, more pleased by a prayer offered at an altar than by a cake being fried in a kitchen.
Of course.
And Brother Lawrence realized that the presence of God doesn't change based on the nobility of the task. The same God who is at the altar is also right there at the stove.
So holiness stops being this escape route from his difficult job.
And becomes the way he intentionally inhabits that job. He makes this internal decision. He decides to treat the kitchen as his assigned, appointed place from God.
If God put him at the stove, then the stove is his sanctuary.
Exactly. Every single mundane act, chopping vegetables, stirring a pot, mopping the stone floor, he started doing it deliberately as an act of worship for an audience of one.
And what's so wild about this is that his physical situation didn't change at all.
Not one bit. He was still the awkward, injured guy in a hot, messy kitchen. The tasks were still small, they were thankless, and most people didn't even notice them.
But the orientation of his heart changed so profoundly that it actually altered his outer world. He found this incredible, consistent inner peace.
And this is the amazing part. The sources confirm that nobles, priests, even respected scholars started traveling to this monastery, not to talk to the learned brothers in the choir,
But to seek out the illiterate, clumsy cook in the kitchen.
yes, for his counsel.
That's the power of the invisible work. He became influential not because he quit the kitchen to go preach, but because he met God there so consistently that it radiated out of him.
His whole life just forces you to confront that modern lie we tell ourselves, that real kingdom work is somewhere else.
Yeah, that my real contribution will start once I get that promotion, or change careers, or start that nonprofit.
And Brother Lawrence is just insisting, no. Where you are standing right now, at the checkout counter, in your cubicle, dealing with the most repetitive task you can imagine, that is one of the main places God wants to meet you.
And critically, to love other people through you in that place.
And this principle is just timeless. I mean, let's fast forward 300 years from that smoky kitchen to the, highly commercialized, low-budget TV studios of mid-20th century Pittsburgh.
A completely different world.
A completely different world, but you find the exact same deep posture in Fred McFeely Rogers. Mr. Roger.
He's receiving his place as a sacred assignment.
Totally. So, Fred Rogers, he's this shy, musically gifted man, and he sees early television, which he famously called shouting pies and faces and cheap laughs, and he is just appalled.
He's disgusted by its disrespect for children.
He develops this deep conviction that this new, incredibly powerful medium that was capturing the minds of a whole generation could and should be used for something better. Not for profit, but to nurture the inner lives of children.
To speak honestly about the hard things.
Yes. And this is the detail we so often forget about him. He wasn't just a nice TV host. He actually enrolled at Pittsburgh Theological Seminary and was officially ordained as a Presbyterian minister.
And his specific charge, his assignment, was ministry through television. His audience was his parish.
He treated that studio, the neighborhood of make-believe, like it was sacred ground. He refused to advertise to children. He maintained that famously slow, thoughtful pace.
He talked about death and divorce and fear.
Yeah, and he resisted all the pressure to constantly innovate or move to a bigger network. He just kept returning to that same small square of studio floor for decades. That was his post.
He modeled that fierce discipline of receiving your workplace, whether it's a kitchen or a Zoom screen, as an assignment, not an accident.
So how do we make this practical? What are the tools for someone listening right now?
Well, the source material gives us some really small, doable moves.
First, you have to rename your workplace. Think of it as a posting, not a prison.
Correct.
You can actually say it, either internally or in a prayer. Lord, I receive this office, this shop, this hospital, as the place you have intentionally sent me today. Help me serve you here. That simple mental shift can reframe anxiety into obedience.
I like that. The second one is dignifying the task by attaching a person to it.
Yes. The moment you go to answer an email, just for a second, picture the image bearer of God on the other side of that screen.
Or when you prepare a legal brief, Imagine the family whose entire life depends on how diligent you are.
It shifts the motivation from just mechanical productivity to genuine love and service.
And third, the sources suggest adopting what they call a tiny rule of presence.
A rule of presence.
Yeah, choose one recurring mundane action you do every day. Opening your laptop, turning the key in your car, putting on your safety gear, and make that your anchor moment.
And in that moment,
Just whisper, I am here for you because you sent me. It's like Brother Lawrence and the frying cake. You're connecting that routine task back to this ultimate divine purpose.
but we have to put a really big asterisk here. There's a critical constraint.
Yes, and the sources are very clear on this. Sanctifying your work does not mean romanticizing it.
And it absolutely does not mean passively accepting abuse.
This is not an excuse for martyrdom.
No. The moment your job consistently requires you to lie or to exploit someone, or it's just destroying your mental or physical health, faithfulness might mean planning your exit.
Or becoming a whistleblower.
Right. The point of Brother Lawrence's story is freedom from anxiety about your status. It is not about being chained to a morally injurious environment. If the work requires you to compromise the very character of the God who sent you, then the assignment is changed.
Discernment is everything here. The God who sends you to a post also reserves the right to reassign you.
The question is always, is this work, as it's currently structured, consistent with God's character? Can I do this without violating my conscience?
And if the answer is genuinely no, then the faithful move is often movement itself.
And that actually leads us perfectly into our second dimension of calling, which is all about that agonizing decision. Do I stay and fight, or do I retreat to what feels spiritually safer?
So we're moving now from the anonymity of the kitchen to a very public, very contentious arena of power.
We're in London, 1785, and we're meeting William Wilberforce.
Now, at this point, he's young, he's brilliant, he is enjoying just spectacular political success as a member of parliament.
He's dining constantly with the Prime Minister, William Pitt the Younger. He's moving easily through the highest levels of British society. He's got it all, basically.
But then he has a deep personal conversion to Christianity that throws his entire life into crisis.
He starts reading the Bible seriously, and the raucous, corrupt, often cruel nature of 18th century British politics starts to feel completely irreconcilable with his new faith.
And it's easy to sympathize with that conflict, isn't it?
Oh, completely. The secular world, especially the political or corporate world, it can feel too messy, too compromised by ambition, too hostile to any kind of public faith.
So the natural pull is to withdraw, to retreat to something that feels cleaner, safer, more overtly spiritual.
And Wilberforce felt that pull intensely. The sources show he was genuinely considering resigning his seat in Parliament.
Giving up all that political power.
All of it, to pursue what he felt was a truly spiritual vocation, maybe entering the Anglican pastorate. He saw the work of Parliament as just incompatible with the holiness he was seeking.
His conflict was so deep, he sought out counsel from two really important people.
One was his political ally, William Pitt, who basically begged him not to waste his talent. And the second was John Newton.
The former slave ship captain turned pastor who wrote Amazing Grace.
That's the one. And this conversation with Newton is the hinge moment. It's the conversation that arguably shaped the next 40 years of British history.
Wilberforce just pours out all his doubts. Is this world too much for a devoted Christian? Should I just get out?
And Newton, drawing from his own, tortured past and the grace he'd found, urged him unequivocally to stay.
He and Pitt both argued that God had already placed him in that powerful strategic position in Parliament for some useful purpose.
This is the powerful insight. The call was not to abandon his secular work. It was to radically transform why he was doing it and what he was using his power for.
So he was being called not to leave the secular power structure, but to transform it from his strategic seat within it.
And he accepted that call to stay. He moved away from defining his career by personal prestige, and he moved toward two specific mandates he believed God had given him.
And these are his famous two great objects. The first was the suppression of the slave trade.
A massive, generational, 40-year fight against huge vested economic interests.
And the second was something he called the reformation of manners.
Right, and we need to unpack that phrase
Right.
because to a modern ear, it sounds like it's just about etiquette.
Like telling people not to slurp their soup.
Exactly. But in the 18th century context, it meant radical public morality. It meant fighting against public vice, drunkenness, cruelty to animals, and most importantly, fighting for social justice reform that went way beyond just slavery.
So he defined his entire political career as a vehicle for obedience to God's desire for public justice.
This principle is so critical because it challenges our assumption that if God is calling you, you must be leaving for an overtly religious job.
Wilberforce proves that the call might be to stay exactly where you are in that messy, contested arena and fight for God's purposes from that very seat, even when it costs you everything.
And you see this principle mirrored so powerfully in the modern legal world with Bryan Stevenson.
The founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, or EGI.
Right. After law school, he did an internship and was just deeply shaken by the reality of systemic injustice. He saw death row inmates who were poor, disproportionately black, and had terrible legal representation.
He could have taken the easy, lucrative path, corporate law, academia.
Instead, he founded EGI in Alabama in 1989. He dedicated himself to providing legal representation for people facing execution, focusing on exonerating the wrongly convicted, and just confronting systemic racial bias head on.
So he stayed in the heart of the fight, in one of the hardest corners of the American justice system.
The courtroom and the prison, they became his parish. He didn't leave law to serve God. He served God by remaining a lawyer. He treated every case, every appeal, every conversation with a client as a way of upholding the dignity of a human being.
What's so interesting about both Wilberforce and Stevenson is that required discipline of stubborn, patient persistence in one place.
Wilberforce fought for decades. Stevenson has spent his entire career based in Alabama, refusing the easy option of retreating to D.C. or a big university.
And there's a quieter parallel to this in the pastoral world with Eugene Peterson.
The author of The Message, he pastored the same church in Maryland for 29 years.
He just stayed put.
He resisted that relentless modern pressure to always be climbing the ladder to a bigger church, a more prestigious platform. He just served the same imperfect people in the same neighborhood, slowly working out what he famously called a long obedience in the same direction.
His life suggests that sometimes the most radical, powerful act of faithfulness is just to stay put, year after year, because that's where God assigned you.
So if we're looking for a practical tool from Wilberforce, it would be this. Name your two great objects.
Okay, what does that mean?
It means write them down. Right now, in this specific job, for this season of your life, what are the two big non-negotiable purposes God has given you here?
And these aren't your company's KPIs.
No, not at all. This is about how your specific role can be a vehicle for loving God and your neighbor. It transforms your work from just a job description into actionable obedience.
But again, we have to come back to that critical constraint check.
We do, because the call to stay in your post is not a command to endure abuse or systemic corruption you can't change, or situations that cause what's called moral injury.
It's a hard line to walk.
It is. If the work demands you lie or exploit people or break the law, the faithful move is almost certainly to leave or to become a whistleblower. You can't just baptize injustice and call it your calling.
Faithfulness in that case might require a massive personal cost, but it means prioritizing integrity over your status.
So discernment is key. When you're facing that kind of toxicity, the question isn't, is it noble for me to suffer here?
The question is, what is God actually asking of me for the sake of my integrity and the welfare of others right now?
And often, the answer to that question requires you to move, but not necessarily for comfort or status. It might require you to move directly toward a place of suffering where you can actually make an impact.
And that brings us perfectly to our third dimension of calling, the idea that vocation is often identified by the suffering you simply can't ignore. So our primary story here takes us back to India in the late 1940s, where we meet an orthopedic surgeon named Dr. Paul Brand.
He was born in India to missionary parents, trained brilliantly in London, and then returned, eager to use his surgical skills at a medical college in Vellore.
He was a highly competent surgeon, expecting to deal with standard orthopedic cases. But one single visit changed the entire course of his life and his profession.
A visit to the leprosy sanatorium at Chingleput.
And the sight was just staggering.
Horrific. Men and women with severely damaged limbs, fingers worn down to nubs, ulcerated feet, often with terrible infections. These were the untouchable people, isolated and shunned by society.
And the medical theory at the time was that leprosy or Hansen's disease, was just this mysterious thing that directly rotted your flesh, causing these slow, awful disfigurements.
But Brand, who is a meticulous observer, noticed something really shocking during his rounds.
What was it? Because this is the medical revelation that changes everything.
He noticed patients resting their hands on hot stoves without flinching, or walking across rough ground on sharp stones without even noticing.
Oh, wow.
And he realized the horror. The disease primarily attacks the peripheral nerves, the nerves that control sensation. It removes the body's most critical defense mechanism.
The gift of pain.
The gift of pain. That is a devastating and profound realization.
So the deformities he was seeing weren't caused by the bacteria directly rotting the flesh.
No, they were the secondary consequence of a life without warning signals. The body was destroying itself because it couldn't register injury or heat. A hand with no pain sense might hold a hot cup too long, get a burn, which then gets infected and leads to bone loss.
And that realization became his unambiguous summons.
For Brand, this wasn't just a medical puzzle to publish a paper on and move on. It became the place where he crossed a moral line. He saw the patients not as medical curiosities, but as image bearers of God who had been dealt this cruel hand.
And he devoted his life to them.
He did not go back to a prestigious post in London. He followed this thread of obedience right into the sanatoriums. He pioneered tendon transfer surgeries to restore movement to paralyzed hands. He designed specialized footwear to protect numb feet from daily trauma.
His whole calling was anchored in defending those who had lost the defense of pain.
And his life just brilliantly illustrates this principle. God often sends us toward the world's most neglected and painful wounds, not away from them.
The pain stops being a signal to retreat and becomes the marker of the assignment.
And he used his sophisticated orthopedic skills to solve the problem of numbness, which required immense engineering and surgical innovation.
We see this pattern in so many other powerful medical stories. Take Dr. Catherine Hamlin.
Hamlin was an Australian obstetrician who arrived in Ethiopia in 1959. She expected to handle routine births.
But instead, she encountered this massive hidden epidemic of obstetric fistula.
A terrible injury, often from prolonged obstructed labor that leads to internal damage, constant leakage, infection.
And just total social rejection for the women who suffered from it.
In Western medicine, it was an academic rarity. In Ethiopia, it was this massive hidden wound.
And she and her husband, they didn't retreat. They were horrified, but they were compelled.
They moved toward the pain. They eventually founded the Addis Ababa Fistula Hospital in 1974, dedicated solely to the highly complex, delicate repair of this injury.
Her commitment was just staggering. She stayed there, serving the same people in the same place for over 60 years until she died.
And crucially, her work wasn't just technical, it was about restoration. Yes, she was fixing the medical problem, but she was fundamentally restoring dignity and community to women who had been shamed and discarded.
She built a place of absolute acceptance.
And then you have the really harrowing recent account of Dr. Tom Katana in the Nuba Mountains of Sudan.
He's the lone physician for over 1 million people in a war-torn region.
So when bombing intensified back in 2011, the environment just became untenable for most outsiders. Church authorities ordered an evacuation, and pretty much all the foreign aid workers left for safety.
And Katina faced intense pressure to leave.
But he refused. And his decision didn't hinge on safety metrics. It hinged on this idea of embodied love. He reasoned that if he left, it would send a signal that his life was more valuable than the lives of his patients.
His call was anchored in the people he served.
He risked his contract, his personal safety, his family's security to stay with his people. He was treating patients in the most rudimentary conditions, sometimes under trees during air raids.
He just said he was sent there to serve these people, and leaving them to die would violate his entire purpose. He asked, what happens to them if I leave right now?
And that gives us a really crucial takeaway tool. When you encounter suffering you can't ignore, you have to bring your specific skills, not just generic pity.
Right. Brand brought surgical and design thinking. Hamlin brought specialized obstetrics. Katina brought trauma surgery.
And for our listeners, it might be financial acumen or teaching ability or coding expertise or complex hospitality skills.
The challenge is to stop treating your skills as just commodities to be sold to the highest bidder.
And start aiming your actual sophisticated competencies at the specific pain you see in your life, your city, or your profession.
We need the constraint check here, though, because going where the pain is can so easily be twisted into unhealthy martyrdom or burnout.
You're finite. You can't carry every burden.
Absolutely. And the sources are careful on this. Serving in hard places absolutely requires rest and friendship and often professional psychological support. If you are chronically exhausted or resentful or numb, the faithful step might be to take a Sabbath, not just to make another sacrifice.
The goal is to sustain a long-term presence, not to chase difficulty for its own sake.
But the central point remains. The call often directs us to stop running from the very places where God's love is most desperately needed and to bring our best professional offering there.
And that deep conviction about why we work leads us into the next phase, redefining the purpose of the work itself.
Okay, part 4 is all about the necessary inner shifts, moving the focus from those outward visible metrics to the inward, sustainable motivations that can fuel a lifelong calling. Let's start with how we approach the cultural context of our work.
So we turn to the contemporary artist Makoto Fujimura. He trained in a traditional Japanese painting technique called Nihonga.
Okay, what is that?
It's a highly specialized process. It involves grinding minerals and natural pigments. It's very slow, meticulous, almost meditative.
And he was wrestling with how to hold on to his deep faith while navigating the contemporary art world.
A world where explicit faith was often, dismissed as suspect or simplistic.
So he's caught between two worlds, the skepticism of the art critics on one side and the occasional anti-intellectualism he found in some religious circles on the other.
Precisely. And that creates this enormous internal pressure to just choose a camp. But his breakthrough came when he rejected the common framework, which is that culture is either enemy territory to be conquered or a hostile environment to escape from.
Instead, he realized culture should be seen as a garden to tend.
Yes, a concept he coined as culture care.
A garden implies stewardship and patience, not warfare.
Exactly. The artist's responsibility is to the soil and the air of the cultural environment itself. His faith deepens his responsibility to the art world, not to judge it, but to cultivate beauty, truth, and mercy within it.
So in the 1990s, he poured this vision into his amazing luminous abstract paintings and founded the International Arts Movement, or IAM Culture Care.
And the aim was not to change the content of art to be explicitly religious. It was to change the ethos of the art world itself.
To plant seeds of excellence and generous patronage and contemplation in that contested ground.
He didn't change careers. He stayed right there in the galleries, the studios, the universities. He accepted that God sent him into that space not to attack it or withdraw, but to cultivate it with beauty and generosity.
And this principle applies no matter what your profession is. You're always shaping the culture of your workplace just by how you run a meeting or how you treat the junior staff.
The parallel here is so perfect. George Washington Carver, tending a very different kind of garden at the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama.
Born into slavery, he becomes this brilliant agricultural scientist in a devastated region. The southern soil was just exhausted by years of monocropping cotton.
For Carver, his complex scientific research into peanuts and sweet potatoes and crop rotation was explicit obedience. He saw plants and soil and chemistry as his assigned corner of creation to steward.
He famously approached his work with extreme humility, saying he prayed for God to reveal the secrets of the plants he was studying.
He believed God revealed methods and ideas to him as he worked diligently in the lab.
So he saw his work improving crop rotation, inventing hundreds of products from neglected crops, as fulfilling a purpose way bigger than his paycheck.
To increase the welfare and happiness of his people in the American South. That is culture care in its most practical scientific form, making the soil fertile, literally and metaphorically.
So the tool here is simple. You shift from winning to stewarding.
Instead of asking, how do I beat my competition? You ask, how can our work, and my contribution to it, leave the people, the community, and this field more humane, more fruitful, and more beautiful than we found them? Choose faithfulness over success, the scorecard.
That framework leads us right to this idea of the internal scorecard, which is just epitomized by Mother Teresa. She provides the ultimate redefinition of success.
Choosing faithfulness over any external metric.
So Calcutta, 1946. Sister Teresa is this respected, comfortable headmistress in a secure convent. She's a visible success by any standard of her religious order.
But on a train ride, she experiences what she called a call within a call.
A profound sense that Jesus was asking her to leave her security and serve the poorest of the poor directly in the slums.
Which meant trading respectability and institutional stability for the absolute chaos of Calcutta's streets, with no plan, no funding, just absolute faith.
And the work was brutal. The dying often died, the poor remained poor. By any typical definition of success scaling, efficiency, visible results, it was a daily, grinding struggle.
Yet her famous maxim, after founding the Missionaries of Charity, became the guiding force for decades. God has not called me to be successful. He has called me to be faithful.
That is the core shift we all resist.
She measured her work not in promotions or the number of conversions or the visible transformation of the slums, but simply in showing up in love where God had sent her.
Her primary question was just, am I being faithful with the task of loving the person right in front of me right now?
It just pushes back so hard against our modern assumption that if you follow God, it should automatically lead to visible success or promotion or comfort. It forces you to redefine what a win even means.
And it's fascinating to contrast Mother Teresa's voluntary poverty with our parallel figure here, our Gilles Letourneau.
The pioneering inventor of earth-moving machinery, known as God's businessman.
He was immensely successful in engineering. He basically invented modern earth-moving equipment.
But just like Mother Teresa, he saw his success through the lens of stewardship and obedience. And his radical decision was to reverse the tithe.
Reverse the tithe.
Yeah, instead of giving 10% and living on 90%, he ended up giving away around 90% of his income to missions and charity.
So he lived on 10%.
He treated his vast company as a trust from God, not a personal asset.
So his faithfulness looked like radical generosity and deep integrity in heavy industry. Mother Teresa's faithfulness looked like scrubbing the wounds of a dying man in a slum.
Yet both of them were operating under the same maxim, measuring their worth by obedience, not by accumulation.
So the tool to apply here is essential. Redefine your win column.
Create two lists. On one side, what does your workplace count as success? Sales targets, market share, promotions, titles.
On the other side,
What might God count? Integrity in a stressful moment, diligence when nobody is watching, acting with mercy toward a difficult colleague, showing patience in failure.
and you have to let that second list fundamentally steer the first one.
And crucially, faithfulness is not an excuse for laziness or mediocrity. Both Teresa and Letourneau worked with incredible competence and discipline. Faithfulness demands you do your job as skillfully as you possibly can. Sign it for God alone. Audience of one.
Our final inner shift brings us to the composer Johann Sebastian Bach and this ultimate focus on the true audience of your work.
So Bach was the Thomas Cantor in Leipzig, starting in 1723. And his job was intensely demanding.
He had to produce a new cantata almost every single week, manage a school, train musicians.
And deal with constant political squabbling and micromanagement from the city council. And the pay was, well, it was modest for someone of his renown.
Yet on his musical manuscripts, often in a small corner or at the very end of the score, he would scribble the initials SDG,
Soli Deo Gloria.
which translates to God alone be the glory. He also often started his scores with JJ for Jesu Juva, or Jesus help me.
And this wasn't a marketing tactic. It wasn't a public statement for the city council. It was a private signature upward, a quiet, almost secret statement about who his true audience really was.
And that practice anchored his motives. By signing his work for the highest listener, he freed himself from the anxiety of human critics.
Especially those city council members who were constantly critiquing his music, finding it too complex or too modern.
He poured his immense genius into music for an ordinary Sunday service, knowing that his primary listener was God.
That is a deeply liberating mindset. It allows for excellence even in unseen work because it's for the one who sees everything.
It pushes you toward the highest standard because God deserves your best, and it gives you this immunity from the fear of human disapproval.
You see this so beautifully mirrored in the life of the Olympic runner Eric Liddell.
Famous from the 1924 Paris Olympics.
Famously, he refused to run his favored 100-meter heats because they were scheduled on a Sunday, which cost him public glory and prestige in that moment.
He ran the 400-meter instead and won, treating his physical gifts and the race itself as an arena to honor God first, regardless of what the crowd expected.
And later, that focus on the audience of one led him to leave fame behind and return to China as a missionary teacher, where he eventually died in a Japanese internment camp during World War II.
Whether he was running or teaching, his core pattern was consistent. His real audience was never the stadium crowd or the history books.
It was the one who sent him.
So the practical tool here is to adopt your own quiet SDG.
You don't need the Latin initials, but create a ritual. Mentally or literally dedicate your key tasks, your most complex project, a hard conversation, the tedious cleanup, with the phrase like, "For you, Lord."
It transforms the drudgery into an offering.
But we need the constraint here too. Audience of one is never an excuse to ignore people. Bach still had to satisfy the needs of the church and the musical requirements of the city.
Serving God includes serving his people well.
Right. If your for God posture consistently leaves your colleagues or clients harmed or shortchanged, you've missed the entire point. True worship in work has to deepen your love for others, not bypass them.
We've covered receiving your post, staying in your post, and these internal shifts. Now we move to the ultimate direction of vocation, toward the margins.
So we come now to the final critical direction of vocation, the call to aim our best skills, our resources, and our attention toward those with the least power.
And this brings us to Millard Fuller. He was a self-made millionaire who, by age 29, had achieved incredible financial success.
But it came at the cost of nearly losing his family. Workaholism, ambition. His life was, by his own account, bankrupt.
The marital crisis forced this profound reckoning. He and his wife, Linda, they wrestled deeply with their faith and their wealth, and it led to this radical act of repentance.
They gave it all away. They drastically simplified their lives. They had to ask, what does God want us to do with our talent now that just accumulating more is off the table?
They ended up at Quinonia Farm in Georgia, which was this experimental interracial Christian community. And there, they helped launch something called partnership housing.
A revolutionary model. They would build simple, decent homes for low-income families using no profit, no interest loans, and they required sweat equity from the homeowners themselves.
And this was the foundation of Habitat for Humanity International in 1976.
Millard's immense entrepreneurial drive, his legal talent, his ability to organize complex projects, none of that was abandoned. It was just redirected.
The goal was no longer to build an empire with his name on it.
But to build stable homes for the marginalized.
And the key principle is so clear. God gives you skills and resources so you can build for the least. You use your entrepreneurial talent and your competence as tools of love, not accumulation.
Fuller famously said, "What the poor need is not charity but capital, not caseworkers but co-workers."
They needed dignity and empowerment.
Exactly. Now let's look at Jackie Pullinger, a young music graduate who traveled to Hong Kong in the 1960s.
She felt this undeniable divine nudge to just get off the boat. She lands in a city she's never seen with no resources, no organizational backing.
And she was drawn to the notorious Kowloon Walled City, the City of Darkness.
A lawless, avoided, incredibly dense maze run by triad gangs, saturated with addiction and crime. This was the place everyone else avoided, the place the government had just written off.
Her response was radical presence. She didn't start a program from the outside and commute in.
She moved into a tiny flat inside the walled city.
She just started with presence, befriending gang members and addicts, believing that God was already present there before she was.
Her philosophy, which guided the St. Stephen's Society she eventually founded, was so poignant. God wants us to have soft hearts and hard feet.
Going where no one else will line up, dealing with the daily reality of addiction and withdrawal, and expecting total obscurity. Her work wasn't glamorous, but it was profoundly effective, restoring lives one by one.
And there's a powerful parallel to Jackie's commitment in the late Dr. Paul Farmer,
the physician who co-founded Partners in Health in Haiti. His entire organizational mission was deliberately the preferential option for the poor in healthcare.
He didn't just aim to provide basic care. He anchored his work in the conviction that the poor should have access to world-class medical care, just like he had in Boston.
So he went again and again to places others deemed too poor or too remote for any serious, sustained medical investment. He built state-of-the-art hospitals in the rural Haitian plateau, showing that competence should be aimed at the forgotten.
And finally, Mary McLeod Bethune, who demonstrates this principle through the power of education in building institutions.
Born to formerly enslaved parents, she knew the transformative power of education against generational injustice.
So in 1904, in Daytona, Florida, she saw Black children locked out of the schools. And with just $1.50 and 5 little girls, she opened the Daytona Educational and Industrial Training School.
Using wooden crates for desks and burnt sticks for pens.
She didn't aim for the status of running a well-funded Ivy League school. She aimed her best teaching, her fierce energy, and her relentless fundraising ability at the children the world forgot.
And she built an institution which eventually became Bethune-Cookman University, trusting God to multiply her effort in the face of deep systemic racism and chronic underfunding.
Her life illustrates the principle perfectly, aiming your best teaching, your best skills at the people the world overlooks. You see the same thing in the hospice movement with Cicely Saunders.
Saunders was a nurse, a social worker, and later a physician. And she realized that modern medicine was failing the people it couldn't cure.
So she founded St. Christopher's Hospice in 1967, dedicating her clinical work to the revolutionary idea that the final months and days of life are not a medical failure.
They're a sacred classroom deserving of profound attention and specialized care.
Her teaching, which launched the global palliative care movement, was so simple but so radical. You matter because you are you, and you matter to the end of your life.
She used all her medical expertise to train others, showing the world the immense value of caring for the dying, the ultimate margin of life.
So the takeaway tool here for all of us is profound. You have to audit your skills as shared property.
List your top abilities, whether it's organizational planning, manual repair, complex analysis, whatever it is, and then list one concrete way each of those abilities could serve people who can't pay you back, people who are overlooked or forgotten.
That's the definition of building for the least.
But the final constraint is important. Building for the least doesn't mean neglecting your own family or becoming a martyr who burns out quickly. Fuller built institutions for sustainability. Bethune built financial partnerships.
You have to constantly ask,
Yeah.
am I serving in ways that truly empower people to stand on their own, or am I just sustaining my own fragile sense of being needed?
The true call is to empower, not just to rescue.
So as we put all of this together, what emerges is this powerful, integrated understanding of vocation that just completely transcends job titles.
Yeah, this deep dive really shows that calling isn't some detailed map you eventually find. It's more like a compass that guides your heart posture wherever you happen to be standing.
It's not about finding the perfect Christian job. It's about approaching the job you have, the one God has allowed you to be in, with these 5 core recurring postures that have been proven across centuries and continents and professions.
First, receiving your specific place as a sacred assignment. Finding the divine presence in the mundane, just like Brother Lawrence did in that noisy hot kitchen.
Second, using your strategic position, whatever its influence, to advocate for justice and dignity, following William Wilberforce's 40-year political fight from the most contested arena.
3, moving intentionally toward the pain you can actually address. Taking your specific, specialized skills to the world's wounds, like Dr. Paul Brand confronting leprosy or Dr. Catherine Hamlin confronting fistula.
4, stewarding your competence as worship, whether that's through agricultural science like Carver or complex music like Bach. Signing your work for God alone, soli Deo Gloria.
And 5, measuring your worth by faithfulness, not by worldly success. Embracing Mother Teresa's radical metric of just showing up in love, especially for the least and the forgotten, like Jackie Pullinger moving into the walled city or Mary McLeod Bethune building a university with crates.
This is a radical call to presence and obedience in your present job, with your present skills, in your present context. If vocation is simply where God sent you, what if the most radical, faithful thing you could do today isn't to look for a new career, but to simply look at your current job, the spreadsheets, the difficult meeting, the grinding administration, the chaos, and ask honestly,
What would it look like if I treated this today as my assignment from God, given solely for the purpose of serving Him and blessing the people He has placed here?
that's the deep dive for today. Now go put your hands to the work you've been given.